Okay,
I texted him last night and asked him if he would do that.
I will. So I asked her, she said 5 to 10 minutes. I was like, okay, well, I've got to condense this because I am a very unique call story. So was saved at 16 in a Baptist church. So I kind of think of myself as a Baptist. I've still got some Baptist roots in Baptist. Still got some Baptist roots in me, but I'm really loving the United Methodist Church. And well, however you want to call it, yeah, Methodist, yeah. I don't know. So many years of Baptist, I think Baptist, but so I was saved at 16 in the Baptist church and was on fire. You know, when you're 16, you're on fire. You want to do everything you can. And then I found drugs and alcohol. 19 years old. Was a serious alcoholic. Not a serious drug. It's recreational drugs. It wasn't like I was smoking crack, but weed, acid, pills, stuff like that. But I drank a case of beer a night. And when I say a case, 24 cans of beer a night. Was still able to get up and work my job. I'd lost my way, was mean, fighting, never got arrested, been in handcuffs. I've been stabbed, I've had guns pulled on me. My story's a Paul story, because I was really awful human being. Lost my way, left the church, wasn't doing anything good, and I met this lady. I'd already been through a divorce. Didn't work out well. Thankfully, that wasn't on me. She was unfaithful to me. So, but I guess when you're married to an alcoholic, it makes it hard. Now, so I try to remember that. So I met my wife, Jeannie, and it was in 2004. And she said, "There's two things if you want to date me." She said, "I prayed for a man with blue eyes that got blue eyes." She said, "I knew God was in it." And I was like, "You done lost your mind." God was the farthest thing from my mind. She said, "Two things if you want to date me. First off, you got to go to church." It's like, I don't want to go to church. She said, "You got to go to church every Sunday, and I have children." I said, "Okay, that's no big deal. They can't have alcohol. I can't be around alcohol. It's in the divorce papers." So I'm thinking, okay, God's got something going on here. So I immediately quit drinking because I fell in love with her. I mean, day one, love at first sight. Quit drinking, started going to church every Sunday in a Methodist church. Thought it was weird, but now Sulphur Springs is a bunch of Baptists sitting in a Methodist church. It really, truly is. So there was no affirmation of faith or anything like that, but still. And I go to church and I say, well, that's okay. I'll just sit here in the back pew, not do anything. God had different plans. He said, well, I want you to teach teen Sunday school class. I'm like, God, I'm not in the business of teaching. I said, I'm so far gone, just teach it. I said, all right, I'm teaching it, but this is all I'm doing. I ain't doing nothing else. He said, okay, I need you to direct the choir. Yeah. You know, I was all-state honors choir in school. And he says, I need you to quit. Somebody else needs to teach this class. You need to direct the choir. I'm like, okay, I'll direct the choir. But this is it. I'm stopping. Not doing anything else. He says, okay, so I direct the choir. He says, while you're directing the choir, I need you to teach the adult class. All right, this time I think I'm 28. I said, okay, so I'm teaching not 28. You know, let's just put it in perspective. And I said, okay, but I'm stopping. He said, nope. He said, now I need you to be the lay leader. What? I said, okay, God, but I'm stopping. Then it went to preaching once a quarter at the church. I was like, what is going on? He said, now I need you to go into the ministry. I said, no, I ain't going into the ministry. I ain't doing it. So I fought it. Jeannie said, my wife, she said, that's the worst 3 years of my life. She said, I was awful. I was miserable, wretched, because I was fighting the call. Still going to church, but I was so mad. I was like, why are you doing this? I said, whatever. I said, okay. So I surrendered. Sandra Johnson calls me, says, I got a supply appointment for you in Cleveland, Virginia. I don't know if you've ever been to Cleveland, Virginia. It is, when I say hole in the wall, it's a hole in the wall. 8 people at the church, but supply pastor nonetheless. Do that for a year, and then she puts me in a 3-point charge, which Bascom burnt down. I only was there 6 months. So I'm in the ministry. Now, here's where it really gets good. This is where Jane gets involved, and then I'll shut up. God says, I need you to go full-time in the ministry. I said, no, I am not going full-time. I got insurance I got to pay. I got a family to take care of. I need this money. I need this money in my full-time job. So I'm working 45 to 50 hours a week plus pastor in 2 churches. He said, if you'll listen to me, if you'll shut up, it'll be better. I said, no. I have no doubt in my mind God gave me COVID. It about killed me. I was sick to the point of, never got in my chest, but I was on IV fluids in my own home, crawling to the bathroom. Lost my job because you get family medical leave, but you only get 3 months. So I'm on month 4. Start to finally heal. Jane says, you want to go full time? I called her to give her an update. It was right before appointment. Said, you want to go full time? I was like, I said, if you find an appointment, I'll go full time, thinking she ain't going to have an appointment. 2 days later, she calls me with a full-time appointment. And I'm blessed at the full-time appointment, and it's not about money with me. But you know, my worries of insurance and money and taking care of my family, the appointment was more money than I was making at my full-time job. Because I will tell you right now, and then I'll leave, God is good. And if you surrender to what he tells you to do, he will take care of you. God has me here for a reason. That's why in all of this, I'm very conservative in my nature, but God has said, you stay here. You work for me here, because there are still good Christian people in the United Methodist Church. And just like every denomination there are good and bad in every one. He said, I don't care how conservative you are, it's love God, love people. And if you and as a pastor with a homosexual sister, if I leave, what am I telling my sister? First off, as a Christian, my witness is destroyed. But second of all, as her brother, I'm saying, I don't love you. So my call story is in a nutshell, don't go against God, because he will make it happen. But it doesn't matter how awful a person you were. God sees you for who God sees you, and God will take care of you. So that's my call story.
So today, I think we have, thank you, by the way. I think we have a great program today. I think one of the things I hear and experience a lot in being out in churches and talking to pastors is that some of what we have lost is the ministry of the laity. And many times I think pastors feel like we're out there on our own. We have to make decisions for our churches, and we have lost some of the ability to equip the people who are actually the members supporting the church. And I think that there is a call to ministry as a layperson that we need to revive in the United Methodist Church. You know, in everything we do in the United Methodist Church, we say that it's 50% laity, 50% clergy. And so that is an equal decision. Paul just came back from jurisdictional conference, and in jurisdictional conference where they elect bishops, the votes are 50% laity, 50% clergy. So all the decisions made in the connectional church are made by laity. We've talked about disaffiliation, and the importance of churches being able to make up their minds and not necessarily be driven by their pastor to follow a certain way. People love their church and they want to give, and Steve Gross is one of those. And I don't know that I've ever worked with a finer lay person than Steve Gross, and he's like one of my favorite people in all the world, and he might be one of yours too. Thank you, Steve.
Jane, could you pass those?
Yes.
Well, Jane asked me to, maybe I need to come forward. Can you hear me? Okay. Jane asked me to come and discuss the United Methodist Church from a viewpoint of a layperson. And I didn't know exactly where this was going to go, but I hope you'll make allowances for what I'm going to say today. I'm hoping very much that this is going to be an audience participation kind of thing, like give and take. I'm going to throw some things out there and see what you all think about it. I've been a United Methodist since my college days. We took a short trip to the Episcopal Church for a while when I was transferred around with the company that I was with. But my wife and I have been at First Church for over 50 years. I've been married to my best friend for that length of time. We have 2 children. Our son, Taylor, and his wife and 3 children live in Washington, D.C., and our daughter, Molly, and her husband and daughter live in Boston, Massachusetts. I have 4 grandchildren, and I can probably spend the rest of the day talking about them if you all would like that. I've been a lay speaker at our church for over 20 years, and then this past year I took the certified lay minister route and was given that designation in June of this year. I've been very active in our church, but also have numerous friendships in other United Methodist churches, and some of the things I'm going to talk about today are examples and stories from those other churches. And also I'm including some stories and events from some of our other denominations. So it's kind of a broad brush. I serve on the Congregational Development Board of the Hosting Conference, and Jane knows me well enough to know that I'm not telling you this to get a pat on my back, but I have served in every single capacity at our church, either chairman or so. If you have questions about the layperson side of things from your church, I can give you my perspective anyway. Right now, my wife and I spend most of our time since we retired with doing outreach ministries at our church. We're very much involved with that. One of those is a ministry we call Claire's Closet, and it's a ministry for during the winter months to give coats, hats, gloves, and scarves to individual folks that need them. We go from October to March, and we've been doing this since 2016. At last count, we keep up with it. We've given out over 4,000 coats to various individuals who have come through our ministry. The coats come from not only our parish, our church, but also from other United Methodist churches in the district and also from the local community. Also, I couldn't not start this today without talking about our youth at First Church. It's kind of an interesting story. Paul Bowman was at our church about a month ago. He came to preach and visit, and on the way up the stairs, we have just recently, the foundation gave us some money. We have recently remodeled our huge youth room, taken it down to the bare bones and put in all new carpeting, new painting, redid all the windows, blinds, new furniture, and it is awesome. And Paul came to see that. And on the way up the stairs to see that youth room, he said, tell me how Jane's legacy has changed your church. And it's Jane's legacy. There's no doubt about it. I don't know, 9 years ago, 10 years ago, we had a junior high teacher at our church, and I still don't know to this day why she did it. You might know. But she invited 4 African American boys in her junior high class to come to our church on Sunday morning. And for whatever reason, those 4 young men walked over 2 miles. I think Jane saw them in her car on the way to church.
It's like 7:30 on a Sunday morning.
Yeah. And they came to our church, and how brave they were to do that, to walk to a white church and walk in the door just to begin with. That in and of itself is interesting. But we loved on them. And years ago, we had a pastor at our church, and he talked about the right hand of fellowship. Now, my wife and I shortened that to the RH of F. And so we always talk about the RH of F. Now, I don't know how that leaves out left-handed people, but I guess it does. But anyway, we gave them the RH of F. It probably gave them the right hug of fellowship. And those 4 boys went home, and they talked to their brothers and sisters and cousins and neighbors and friends. And before we knew it, those 4 became 10, became 20, became 50, became 75. All of a sudden, we needed more staff to work it. We were sending out vans to pick these kids up. And before we know it, we were serving close to 200 kids at First Church. And we were serving them on Sunday and on Wednesday, and during the week, they were coming because they were not being fed at home. We were fixing sandwiches. We had a computer lab. We had dance lessons. We had piano lessons. We had violin lessons. We had guitar lessons. We just opened the doors, and these kids had food insecurities. They were abused. They had drug problems. Their parents were druggies. They were pushers. They lacked clothing. They had emotional issues. They lacked parental support. They had anger. They had fear. It was unbelievable. And it was not easy to begin with because they were unchurched. They didn't know how to even respond to what we were trying to do for them. But anyway, COVID came. Jane moved on to DS, and that whole thing went down to next to nothing because we had to go and meet them as we could during COVID. But praise God, it's coming back. We have over 100 back again now. And 1/3 of our budget for First Church goes to these kids. It's just phenomenal. It's changed our lives. It really has. And that's the end of enough about me, enough about First. But I want to talk first of all about the historical aspects of laity to begin with. And I know that you all have been through seminary and you know all this, but I don't want to talk about John Wesley. I want to talk about his mother, Susanna, because she had such a profound influence on him. And she was the daughter, as you probably know, of a Puritan minister, and her grandparents were also Puritan. But even though she married an Anglican priest, she had this Puritan background in her pedigree. And she received a classical education, and because of this, it was kind of unusual. She ended up teaching her 10 children and girls how to read, write, math, and to study Scripture. And when her husband Samuel was gone on various trips, she would invite lay people into her home where she conducted services and had scripture readings and actually preached. And the people of that Anglican church, the men, had a fit because a woman is not supposed to do this. And because she exercised that independence of conscience and that Puritan nonconformity, Samuel came home and said, you're going to have to stop this. And she tells him, she says, look, when we meet the Lord on Judgment Day, do you want to be responsible for saying that I have not given the word to people of our parish? And that was the end of that argument. And I think these interactions with lay people set the tone for John Wesley, who later, when he sent delegates to the colonies to spread the word from Methodist societies, he sent lay people. He didn't send pastors, he sent lay people. And even though they had conversions in our country, the beginnings of our country, they couldn't take the sacraments. They had to go to an Anglican church because there were no ordained pastors. Later on, as you well know, lay people didn't get much recognition in the United Methodist Church. It didn't happen really until 1932, I believe. But today, as Jane mentioned earlier, the role of laity in our church, the traditional pattern has seemed to evolve into where you all, as pastors, are producers, and we, as laity, are consumers. And this is not the biblical model of the way it should be. And in order to discover these core values we're going to talk about a little bit later, I'm going to use some examples, actual events that have taken place in various churches, situations. But the director of lay leadership development of the General Board, his name is Titus Lowe, said more churches should embrace the view of laity's role. As the church has evolved, there should be a model of clergy equipping laity. And this has been kind of replaced with clergy who are emphasizing preserving the institution, and the laity are, rather than the laity being pushed out and moved into ministry. And that can be a real problem. She goes on to say, clergy and laity alike need to discover the Wesleyan roots of where we came from. And this rediscovery, this reclaiming of the partnership between clergy and laity is going to help grow our church again. This is my opinion. And now my first question to you all is, in your churches, are you seeing a definitive line between clergy and laity? Are your folks consider themselves consumers and you to do all the work? Or I'd like to hear what you have to say about that. This is the audience participation part.
What I have found in a lot of the churches I have been pastor of, is they became very pastor dependent.
Mm-hmm.
And so they assume the pastor will do 90% of the work. And they might do 10% of it if they want to.
Mm-hmm.
But basically they expect you as the pastor to plan all the activities, do all, put all your other parts, plus run all the committees, do everything with all that, have everything done until they can just sort of show up. That's in my experience, especially in my current home.
Mm-hmm.
Very consumer driven.
Because this, have you ever heard this one? Well, pastors only have to do a sermon for an hour a week, right? Haven't you heard that one? Yeah. So, a professor of church history, Diane Lowbody, from the Methodist Theological School, says Methodism is kind of a school for leadership development, nurturing gifts, quick to identify people's strengths and talents, and readily deploying people in the service of the gospel. And this was true in early American Methodism, even though you were dramatically defined by constrainment of race and gender, which took years to kind of overcome. But Methodists, even though that was going on, they took seriously their responsibility to share their faith. And they led class meetings, they served as stewards and trustees, and directed orphanages and schools for poor children. R. Paul Stevens, he's a professor, author, and pastor, said, "The roles of clergy and laity should not be separated. Clergy and laity should be of one body functioning together. And when it doesn't happen, this can be unhealthy for the church as a whole, and actually for the pastor on a personal level too. The consequences of this model of ministry creates a gap between the pastors and congregations, and laity are underdeveloped, and the role of ministry falls on the clergy." How do you motivate your laity in your churches to join you in mission and ministry today? How's that happening?
I think a lot of times, it's not that they don't want to do, they feel like they're not welcome to do. So you gotta let them know, and I'm very blessed with buyers that they do a lot. Let them know that you need them, let them know that they're wanted, and if you give them the chance to do it, they'll do it. So I think just letting them know, it's almost like it's letting them know it's okay. It's okay that you do this.
I think our way of deploying clergy, which originally was, I think, based on the assumption that the church was lay-led, that's why at the circuits, the laity take care of the church, and the circuit rider shows up to do the things that only the preacher could do. Now may not serve the laity as well, because if there's frequent turnover, I mean, we could argue all day long that the church should be more lay-led, lay-driven, have a consistent character for a lot of different reasons. That's not the case, and sometimes too frequent of a change in pastoral leadership, and then stark difference in style and a lot of other things. So you have some laity who have been burned by that, and others who said, well, that pastor wanted to do it all himself or herself. I got into leadership under that pastor, and that was really good, and then there's a change, and that wasn't good. That was a real painful experience, and I don't want anything to do with it. So I think some of where we are is tied up in trying to figure out why we do what we do, and how to do it better with the deployment of clergy. That's one observation.
Have you heard this one? I've done that. Let somebody else younger do it. What if there's nobody else younger? You know, sometimes I think it involves maybe thinking a little bit out of the box in order to get laity, to get them on board. I really do. I think the gap between the pastors and their congregations, I think, can be narrowed. But I think this change is only going to take place if pastors take the initiative to try and train your laity in ministry and ground them in theology. That's my take on it. I may be wrong about that, but don't you just love a lay person telling you what to do? Narrowing the gap means your primary theologians in your congregation are really your laity, because they're out there. They're the face of your ministry. They're out there at school, in the workplace, in their neighborhoods. They're the front lines of the ministry. And I think long-term, changing the current way we're doing business can have long-term rewards. And that's, again, my take. But I think pastors who make delegating and equipping laity for ministry a priority are going to lead growing congregations in the 21st century. That's, again, my take. But Rick Warren is not my take. Rick Warren observes that pastors need to release their laity into ministry. The greatest need for churches in our time seems to be to have more laity involvement. And then there's a recent Gallup poll that was taken, said that only 10% of American church members are involved in any kind of personal ministry. 10%. 50% have no interest in being involved in serving in ministry. But the good news about that poll is that 40% would like to be involved, but they don't know how to go about doing it. And they, in the traditional model of our churches, laity may be a little bit somewhat hindered at that.
In the Gallup poll, it said 50% are not interested.
Yeah,
Did the Gallup poll say anything about like, this is what that 50% says as to why?
no, I'm sorry, I don't have that. But I'd like to know myself. Yeah, because it may be, not maybe that those 50,
Because I run into that not only in my current appointment, but in previous appointments. They say, hey, would you, you know, you came up with nominations. So I always try to look at nominations as a positive, you know, at a minimum, it's an affirmation of your peers saying, you would be good for this.
yeah,
So at a maximum, it gives you an opportunity to be a part of good thing. And this has happened, well, last 3 or 4 appointments. There's 1 or 2 people, and I know there's a story there. I know there's a story. There's 1 or 2 people say, well, you know, hey, Fred, it's usually, it's not to me, it's usually one of the members of the committee on lay leadership. Well, Fred, we'd like to nominate you for a spot on the staff parish, for trustees, or finance. I will never serve on that committee. I don't want to serve on any committee.
mm-hmm,
And they'll put that back.
mm-hmm,
So one day they said, why did Fred say, no, no. I know there's a story.
mm-hmm, yeah,
I don't know if it was like pastor 20 years ago,
Mhm.
on staff parish, and, you know, that's kind of a fair assumption. But I know that there's a story there, but, I mean, they're just, I mean, they're there on Sunday, they'll usher, they'll, you know, help hang the Christmas tree,
mm-hmm,
the decorations, the Advent day stuff. They won't be on a committee if they've done.
yeah,
And I don't, there's a, I kind of wonder if there's a disconnect too on laity understanding, well, what it means to be laity at a church. It's not just to sit in the pew.
yeah.
And so maybe you're going to talk more about that. I'm not
Well,
trying to get heady, but it's just on pastor, you know, we do ask and we're
Yeah.
willing to help, but when you get people go, no,
yeah,
don't ask me. You know, almost,
Yeah.
almost they're offended you even ask.
yeah, yeah. Well, I think, in my experience, I have been amazed how individuals can sometimes get ticked off for one comment or one silly thing said to them. It's just amazing to me how that happens. But I also know that we're dealing with human beings, and I hate to say this, but every tree has some nuts on it. I guess that shouldn't go out to the general public there. We have a few in our church.
Well, and I guess too, I think, maybe because I'm clergy,
Yeah.
such and such, or she did such and such, I hate her, blah, 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 you know, I'm gonna down that practice, da, da, da. They wouldn't do that to the doctor, they wouldn't do that to the lawyer,
No.
they don't do that to the school board,
Mm-mm.
they'll do it to their pastor.
Mhm. Yeah.
And I'm sitting next to a teacher, and as I'm saying that, she's like,
Yeah.
but it just seems that way. I've never heard of a doctor go, well, you know, I told somebody they need to lose some weight for better health, and they just stormed out and won't come back. And I've never heard that story.
No.
I have.
Okay.
More than you would think.
Well, in an odd kind of morbid way, that's comforting, because it's
Well,
not just clergy.
It's not. And to me, something that I think is operating, you know, something that kind of operates from the background is that, you know, you can, like, you know, like the parent-teacher organizations that they have at school. You almost have to move heaven and earth to get people to take a leadership role in the organization for their own children. You can't get them invested in that.
Mhm.
It's certainly not an easier task to
Mhm.
try to get them
Mhm.
to serve in church, but I think that generally speaking, most people really are perfectly just to come and consume. But the idea that you already have 10% who will actually,
Mhm.
and 40% who could be encouraged to be active, to me, that's a very encouraging.
Yeah, it should be. I think it should be. I think sometimes we have laity that step up at the most unbelievable times. We have become, and I don't know what your situations are, but we have become, because of where our location of our church is, obsessed with security. And First Church in Johnson City has 14 different doors to get into our church. Isn't that right? I counted them. 14. So it opens the door for any kind of situation on a Sunday morning or a Wednesday night or a Christmas Eve service or whatever. So we have had to, by hook or crook, come up with a security detail, which it's just imperative, unfortunately. Just the way things are. So we had this guy at our church who sat in the back, next to the back row for years. He never, ever participated in anything. He was a consumer, you know. But that security situation just sparked something for him. And he's now so involved in our church because he feels like it's important to him to be a part of that. And now he's leading the whole thing. It's amazing. And we actually have people coming to our church 7 days a week, twice a day, because we have vagrants who are sleeping outside and that kind of thing. And I just think it's simple. Sometimes you'd be surprised at lay people stepping up when you really would least expect it. The problem, I guess you touched on it a little bit, but one of the characteristics of our United Methodist Church is the fact that you all, for the most part, are inherently itinerant, and you're moving. And in order to have a consistent ministry with well-led, well-trained laity, sometimes it can really throw the church off a little bit when you have pastors that are changing, you know. But that's just the way things are right now. But I think the effectiveness of ministry in our church also needs to be that pastors and clergy celebrate whatever is going on that is lay-led. Sometimes, I hate to say that doesn't often happen. And I think you need to remember that I think you can get into a pattern where so-and-so, Mr. X or Miss Y or whatever, is so faithful and does their thing. You might forget to remind them occasionally that you appreciate what's going on. I'm not trying to throw shade on any pastors, but that's been the experience of some churches that I've been in before. Also, this was told to me by a member of another church, not United Methodist, that they had a flourishing ministry that was going on, actually run by lay people. And when a new pastor came in, they were a little bit intimidated by that ministry. And they wanted to have their own benchmarks and their own rewards or whatever you want to call it. And it caused an issue in that particular church. I don't know if you can see that or not, but
You're up in a church, the youth group got so big and so powerful, so meaty, the pastor's intimidated by it.
yeah,
And basically trying to kill it.
yeah.
My parents left the church and went somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
Like my sisters were teenagers.
Yeah.
So I've seen that actually
Happen.
where the pastor got intimidated by something that was thriving.
It should have been,
Should have been a great thing,
Yeah.
it wasn't run by him.
yeah. The North Georgia Conference of the United Methodist Church did a survey on how to grow intentional spiritual growth of lay people in their churches. and they surveyed hundreds of churches across the country, and this is what they came up with. I thought they were pretty good. First of all, it must be intentional. You, as a spiritual person, lay person in a church, you can grow old without growing up spiritually. And sometimes you need to think about that with the people that you work with. It's incremental. It takes place over time. It's a step-by-step process, making deeper and deeper commitments. It's personal. No two disciples grow at the same rate or in the same manner. Our growth in grace is as God decides it's to be. And there's no cookie-cutter disciples. It's practical, habitual. God gives us practical ways to grow and achieve this through the Bible reading, being led by the Spirit, daily time in prayer, studies in private and corporate. It's relational. We sometimes can't grow alone. We have to grow as a community with accountability. It's multidimensional. There's fellowship, worship, private and corporate, discipleship, ministry, and mission along the way. I'll give you an example of something that happened at our church just recently. On our first Wednesday nighter of this year, we decided to do barbecue and just to get people back into the Wednesday night program. And for whatever reason, we had an older fellow who had been coming to he and his wife been coming to our church. They raised their kids there forever. He was almost 80 years old, and he must have liked bingo. So he shows up on Wednesday night. He hadn't been there in decades. And when he walked in, I saw him coming in, and I knew immediately what the problem was. We had 120, 30 people there. A lot of them were young African-American kids and a lot of younger families that he didn't even know because he never was in a Sunday school class, but he was a consumer. He came every Sunday and listened to her or somebody else in the pulpit. But they're good givers in a well-known family in Johnson City. But when he walked in, he was just shocked because he didn't even know where to sit. It was pitiful. It was pitiful. So I took him over and I said, "This is so-and-so. You knew his grandfather." "Oh, yeah." And then he sat down, and the rest of the night was just, he was running the show. It was wonderful. He had the most wonderful time. But he was a consumer and had never taken part, had never really listened to what was going on in our church, which to me was pretty sad. Back to those growth things, it's seasonal. Sometimes you have a summer and a spring where there's lots of growth and bearing fruit, and then you have a winter or a fall where the roots are growing deep and it's a time of strengthening, so you don't see much. So it goes back and forth. It's incarnational. The goal is to move to be an imitation of Christ. I gave a few weeks ago, I did a sermon at our church. It was based on Luke 51 through 62. It's the story when Jesus is heading back to Jerusalem. It's right before he ascends into heaven. He's on his way back. And he meets those three guys on the road. There's someone, another, and yet another. We don't even know who they are because they never chose to say yes to when he said, "Follow me." And the first one came up and said, "I will follow you wherever you go." And of course he answered, "Birds have nests and foxes have dens, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head." I think he was telling that guy that we as Christians are never going to be able to rest because we're on a mission. And I think that's what it should be with our laity too. They should somehow come to that realization that it's more important than just being a consumer. And then that second man said, "I have to bury my father. I have to go back and bury my father." But of course, the truth of the matter was his father wasn't dead. He wanted to go and get his inheritance from his father before he could then come and follow Jesus. So it was a matter of convenience for him. And then the third guy, of course, wanted to go back and get permission from his family and friends. So he didn't want any consequences to his discipleship. I think those things are some excuses that we may be seeing even today in our churches. And I'm sure it's things that you all are dealing with on a regular basis. I think one of the aspects of a vital congregation and having your lay people and your clergy work together can be visualized in nature. We live out on Boone Lake. We've lived there for 23 years, and I don't know, but for whatever reason, there's a flight pattern of Canadian geese that come right over our house every year. Same time, Labor Day weekend it starts. And those geese are in a V pattern. Now, you can hear them coming because they're honking like crazy. And that V formation is, you've got one leader and the rest of the geese are behind honking, giving support. And I naively thought for years that head goose, if you want to call it that, stayed the same throughout the whole trip. But that's not true at all. What actually happens is when that leader gets tired, he or she falls back and the next goose comes forward and takes over. And then they keep doing that over and over again. And by the way, if one of those geese gets tired, two of them go with them and stay with that goose until they're no longer tired, or if they've been hurt or whatever. So they have somebody going with them. But that V formation conserves energy to a point that they can travel 71% further in a flock like that than an individual goose. And I think that's a really good example of God showing us that we need to have not only you all, but we need to have your lay people working with you. I found this, I thought this was kind of interesting. I found 7 deadly statements that church members can say. I'm going to throw some shade on us as laity now. This is first one. I like our church just the way it is. Have you heard that one? Years ago, my wife and I were at a small church, and it was in North Carolina. And we were newly married, no kids, and we volunteered to teach 3rd grade Sunday school to about 20 kids. And on the way to our class, one of those first Sunday mornings, we heard 2 choir ladies saying to each other. One of them said, "I am so tired of all these new people at our church." That, remember I said how one comment that was like a buzzsaw to us in terms of how we felt about that church. And here's another one. My pastor doesn't visit me enough. Have you all heard that one? I was telling Paul before we started that we have started a ministry for our shut-ins and our folks that are in nursing homes and at home can't come to visit. And I've gotten a new appreciation for what the pastors at churches have to do as far as visiting. We've got 18 people that are currently not able to come, and we're taking once a month, we're taking something to them, like flowers or candy or Valentine things or poinsettias, or each month we've got something we're dealing with. And it's amazing to me how important it is when you go and visit those folks to listen to what they have to say, and I don't see how it's humanly possible for a pastor to deal with that many visits along with everything else that has to be done in our churches. Besides that, we send out packets to individuals. Right now, we've got about 40 folks that cannot get online and see our services. So we send out weekly packets to them with the written sermon and the newsletter and the bulletin, so that they can read what's going on at our church, try and keep that line of communication open. I have one guy that used to come to our church. He's passed away now, but this is what he would. I can hear him saying this. I always vote no just to keep the leadership in check. And when he would come to meetings, and this is the honest truth, he would come to meetings, and we'd be around a table like this. He would put his chair back about this far back with his arms like this. Do you ever look at your body language of your congregation? It was so obvious to me that he was there just to make things interesting. Here's another one. I can't worship with this style of music. Have you heard that one? We've got one member of our church right now who's not coming because he doesn't like our praise band. So he comes to Sunday school, but he won't come to church. People know where our church is, so if they want to come, they can come. That's another one. Here's another one. I love you, Pastor, but I don't know what's going on in our church. It's the old communication situation. Have you had that one? It drives me crazy, because when people say that to me, because they consider me one of the leaders of the church for whatever reason, I say, look, we've got Facebook, we've got Instagram, we've got emails, we've got newspaper, we've got a bulletin, we've got 6 screens, for heaven's sakes, we've got mail-outs, we've got newsletters, and we've got a written calendar that we give you every month. So what more can we do here, folks? You know, but it's that communication thing, and they love to pull that one. Just lay people love to pull that one. I pay my tithes, so I deserve. You hear that one? Tim Nichols has written an article about a vision in a church. There are numerous reasons given for the fact that many churches are experiencing limited growth or decline, and some of those factors are a maintenance mentality or prioritizing sustaining your church programs or facilities. That might be one. Pastoral dependency or limiting lay members' participation. Apathy or complacency about the lost in your community or around your church. Or the fourth one is lack of a clear vision, purpose, or direction to unify and inspire the energy and resources of your congregation. It's suggested that the last reason may have potential to change the whole system. The role of vision in a church is not the same as having a mission statement. A vision is a descriptive picture of the future of your congregation. It should answer the question, what would it look like if we were really fulfilling our mission? Should the vision come from the pastor? Should it come from your congregation? Should it come from a committee? Being clear about the best source of vision would be significant for pastors and churches, and it's suggested that usually it's best thought if it's a consensual process. So the congregation and the pastor may be waiting for the vision to happen from planning and doing it together, or the vision may not arrive in a clear, recognizable form. Sometimes it's over a period of time where you see a pattern or a direction. It's not well articulated or formed. Example of this, for us, 10 years ago, if you had told the membership of First Church at my church that they would be ministering to a group of low-income kids on a regular basis, they would have thought you had lost your mind. And that's the honest truth. African-American kids, Asian kids, special needs kids we have, gay, handicapped kids. It evolved. The vision of our church is very simply, it's to serve the underserved and forgotten children of our community. It's very simple. But as I said earlier, a third of our budget is now going to this. Vision helps align individuals, thus coordinating actions and motivated people in a remarkably efficient way. Visions are specific, customized, distinctive, and unique to a given church, and it allows you as pastors to say no to opportunities, to provide direction. It empowers people for service and facilitates productivity. To arrive at a shared vision, it will mean nothing if your pastor and church leaders do not carefully and seriously approach the congregation with the process of ownership of the vision. It's got to be owned. A vision or sharing a vision does not come from a monologue. It comes from a dialogue. It's not truly shared unless it connects on a personal level with people throughout the organization. For a pastor or church leaders to accomplish this, it means that they have to listen to what God is speaking to them, and also what are the values and passions and visions of the individual people. Sometimes, sad to say, you may have a vision for your church, but you're going to find folks who are not on board with it. That happened to us. I know Jane will know exactly who I'm talking about. We had a couple, two gay individuals at our church who had been there forever, and we loved them to death, but they couldn't see the ministry of what was happening with our youth, because they were focused on the fact that one of them had an older mother, and they felt like we were not taking care of the older folks in our church, and that was so far from the truth. But they were so focused on that one thing that they couldn't see the beauty of what was going on at our church with our kids. But I think you're going to sometimes run into that. There's always going to be somebody who may or may not share what your ministry is. All right, do you all see that sometimes at your own churches? And it can be debilitating. It can to a pastor and to the rest of the folks in the church, because you think, what's wrong with these people? But anyway.
I had the benefit of my first appointment, our leader, the man who's the church had appointed his basement, still attending there. He was concerned about the church enough to speak to the entire church about it.
Mm-hmm.
And he had a vision, and they jumped on board. I just sort of walked with them. I didn't,
Mm-hmm.
and I've never had that happen since, but it was one of those, it was a lay driven,
Mm-hmm.
completely.
Mm-hmm.
He said, we need to do something different, and we did something different, and now that church has grown since I left, but because it came from somebody they respected.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't me.
Yeah.
The person I was sitting there.
Yeah. Well, I can give you some examples of vision statements for various churches. I thought that some of these were pretty good. High Point Church in Memphis, Tennessee, to be a place where love works. The Potter's House in Dallas, Texas. We are a voice and hand that encourages people to change their lives with hope, comfort, and peace. Willow Creek in South Barrington, Illinois. We believe all people matter to God, and that Christ's message and ministry through our local church is the hope of the world. The Glide Church in San Francisco, California, to create a radically inclusive, just, and loving community mobilized to alleviate suffering and break cycles of poverty and marginalization. Coral Ridge Presbyterian Church in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. I don't know if you've ever seen this church. It's unbelievable. It has the tallest steeple of any church I've ever seen. We go to Florida every now and then. Coral Ridge, their steeple goes up. It looks like it's about 6 stories. It's unbelievable. The cross at the top has to be bigger than a man because it's so high up there. I've often wondered how they aren't worried about hurricanes, but apparently they're not. Their vision is to rescue and replenish a world lost and broken by sin, thereby making all things new. Kensington Community Church in Troy, Michigan, to turn people who think God is irrelevant into fully devoted followers of Jesus Christ. Christ the King Church in Bristol, England, to be a Christ-centered church in an influential city which multiplies and helps other churches toward shared goals across the region in Western Europe and beyond. Interesting thing about Bristol, England, that's the city, if you remember the story about Wesley, John Wesley, he was thrown out of churches in London. You remember, because he was a bit too radical. The Anglicans didn't like him, so he was down to maybe 2 or 3, 4 churches in London. And so George Whitefield invites him to come to Bristol to preach because he was friends of him in Oxford. And so that's when he starts going out to the fields and remember all that? And that's the same town where this vision came from. Glad Tidings, Omaha, Nebraska, Methodist Church out there for saints and sinners, seekers, for individuals and families, for those more or less fortunate, for young and old, for blue collars, white collars, and no collars. At Glad Tidings, the good news is for all people. Saddleback Church, Lake Forest, California. It's the dream of a place where hurting, the depressed, the frustrated, the confused can love, find acceptance, help, forgiveness, and guidance. Then I want to mention one thing here. I didn't tell you to begin with, but my background as far as non-church background was I was involved in running 2 companies and also a bank in Johnson City. And I made it my business during my work career to know what my competitors were doing. I felt like that was important. And today in our United Methodist Church, this is just me, and you all may not feel this way, but I know that we're being told that we have to love these folks as they're walking out the door, and that's all well and good, and I appreciate that sentiment, I really do. But I have to look upon the folks that are pulling people from our United Methodist Church as a competitor. And that's just me. Where are they getting their people? They're getting them from the United Methodist Church. So I need for you all to know what the Global Methodist Church thinks about laity. And this is what they say. Empowering laity in the New Methodist movement, and this was written by Reverend Walter Fenton. In order to be healthy and a vibrant branch of the Church Universal, the New Methodist movement must equip and empower laity for ministry and service. This is a truism in any church, but it's critical in our New Methodist movement. Many local churches in the U.S., particularly those with shrinking congregations, are facing also maintain support for local and global ministries. But the Wesleyan Covenant Association is convinced the most important way to meet and surmount challenges will be found in leveraging the gifts and passions of the laity. We will embrace the notion of a priesthood of all believers, and we'll call upon laity and clergy to work together in a partnership of servanthood. We believe that sharing the gospel must be entrusted to the whole church, not just to the individual clergy, but to lay people as well. This movement, calling for laity, is going to be very involved in selecting, evaluating, and holding accountable the general church's Episcopal leaders, a notable departure from the United Methodist Church. It calls on lay to be more involved in the process and selecting of deploying clergy. Despite the challenges ahead, though, WCA is full of hope and excitement that the new Methodist movement, where laity are equipped and empowered, will have a far more active role in our churches. So I just think that's important for you all to know, and you probably already know that. I am following, I told Jane this morning, because of this competitive thing in my head, I'm following the Global Methodist Church. I'm following what's going on in the Wesley Covenant Association because I want to know what they're saying, and some of it is so absurd and bad information. I can't, as a layperson and trying to calm the congregation, my own congregation, I feel like I need to know exactly what's being said out there. Here's some things. I've kind of talked to you about what some things that lay people can do that can really put a roadblock for you all as pastors. And now I'm going to turn the tails on you all a little bit. I'm going to give you some actual case things that have happened in churches in my experience, and also not only at my own church, but also in some other United Methodist churches, and also I have included some friends of mine. I called some friends of mine who are in other denominations, and these are some things that have happened to them as well. I want you to hear some of these. Pastor arrives at a church in July. After the usual summer slow period on a busy fall Sunday with a full church, ask for all members of the church who are 50 years of age and older to move to the right side pews of the church. Anybody who is 50 years of age or younger move to the left side of the church. I think the intent was to show the congregation the challenge that they faced with an aging congregation. What do y'all think about that one? How do you think the 50-year-olds felt about that one? You're shaking your head. Do you not think that everybody that was 50 years of age and older knew that they were 50 years of age and older? I think there's a new word for that. It's called ageism now. Is that what it is? Somebody told me later that the pastor, by the way, all these pastors are gone. They're long gone. But no, but they described that particular pastor as a doofus. So, anyway. All right. A pastor of a church attended and oversaw or ran every single meeting to make sure that the agenda aligned with the pastor's ministerial objectives. To do that? I don't know. Pastor on a Sunday evening called the lay leader of the church and told the lay leader there was a person in a nearby motel that was threatening suicide. The pastor had received the phone call from this person who was not a church member, and the pastor asked the lay leader to go to the motel and counsel the troubled individual. Actually happened. Yeah. I can tell you about this one because I was a lay leader at the time. The pastor's long since gone, passed away, but I really struggle with that one. It's kind of crazy because I thought, well, maybe I ought to go and help that guy. And my wife said, "Are you out of your mind?" You know, we have a young child and whatever. But anyway, that actually did happen. Pastor of a church called an outside consultant to come into the church and evaluate ways to enhance and grow the congregation. The primary tool to do this was to eliminate the conventional committee names of the church that had been used for decades, replace these names with new nomenclature. The idea was to bring new life into the church and to enter the congregation. Yes.
Going back to the previous story, you can't let the cat out of the bag that you were the lay leader and that happened to you and not tell the conclusion. Right.
Oh.
What happened?
I did.
Did you go?
Oh, no, I thought I made it clear. No, my wife wouldn't let me go.
Okay, what happened to the man? Did you just,
Well, he wasn't a church member, and nobody, my pastor never followed up. No, he never followed up.
so there's a question mark as to
Yeah, that's, you're right. I don't know. That's a big question mark. But it happened a long time ago, but I wouldn't, I don't think I would venture to allow anybody, a layperson to go out.
Oh, I think
Yeah.
your wife was correct.
Yeah.
I was just curious if you
Yeah.
did.
No, I didn't go. No, and I don't know what happened to him either. And I don't even know why he happened to call, how he got hold of our pastor's number, but somehow he did. What about changing the names of, do you think that would make a difference in a church?
You can make everybody mad.
Already use initials for most things anyway.
Yeah. Well, it was an outside consultant, and they paid money to bring this guy in, and I'll be real honest with you, it didn't work. And it caused some issues in the church because people were not comfortable with, and they never really understood what the intent was. You know, it may have been good intent there, but it didn't work. All right, here's a good one. A new pastor is assigned to church. This pastor he and his wife are in their 40s. Church has about 800 members, approximately 250 on a Sunday morning. The church has an active Sunday school program. Classes include groups of 80-year-olds, 70-year-olds, late 60-year-olds, 40 and 50-year-olds, pairs and spares, and college age group. The question to you all is, which age group should this 40-some-year-old pastor go to for his go-to group for launching his ministry at that church? What do y'all think?
Which one should they visit first?
Which one should they circumvent and use the most to push their ministry at their church? Well, I can tell you what they did. They zeroed in on the 40-year-olds because they were 40 years old, both of them, and that's where they concentrated all their efforts. Now, you know what happened with that? The interesting thing was that 60-year-old age group I was telling you about, there were 45, 50 people in that class who had just recently retired. And those folks were totally excluded from the go-to group. Do you see what happened? It was a disaster. That ministry was a disaster at that church because they didn't realize that you had a golden opportunity there with folks that were willing, and just by the way, they just finished their jobs and they needed something to do, and for all intents and purposes, if you want to know the truth of it, it ruined that pastor's ministry. It never worked. It didn't work. That one decision caused that whole thing to fall apart. That pastor ended up leaving that church and saying later that there's no hope for this church. There was a capital campaign to raise money for an addition to a church. The pastor identified the good givers of that church to have them go to a separate classroom, and they were told that they would raise, that group of people would raise 40% of the needed funds to do that addition to that church. Additionally, one of the big givers of that church held up a check on Wednesday night and said, I'm giving X number of dollars to this thing, and I want to know who's going to match what I'm doing. Now, what do y'all think about that one? It totally ticked off a lot of people. It really did. You just don't single out individuals that way. It really was a disaster. A fairly large church just assigned a new pastor. The church had an associate pastor. Additionally, the church had a retired UMC minister who served this church previously, some 20, 30 years before. The retired pastor was designated as a visitation minister, and he was really caused a problem for the senior pastor of the church. Have you seen that? It caused a huge problem. Bank boards. The finance committee asked for members to elicit bids from various institutions. One bid came in lower and more favorably for the church than any of the others. The following Sunday, the pastor had that banker stand up and be recognized for I think the other bankers felt. There are changes coming to our United Methodist Church. Do other United Methodist churches going through the disaffiliation process cause a concern for your church? How do you address this with your congregation? Let me tell you one thing not to do if you want to hear from a layperson's perspective. Do not tell your church that the United Methodist Church has been changing and evolving for 50 years. We don't want to hear that. I'm just telling you, that may be the case, but that doesn't make us feel any better about what's going on. Well, I'm more concerned about the ministry and mission that's going on in our church and other churches. I want to hear the good things. I don't want to hear about the fact that for whatever reason they're saying we don't believe in the resurrection, or we don't believe in this, we don't believe in that. And it doesn't help to focus on what has happened with black individuals over the years and how they were not recognized, or how women were not recognized. I know all those things happened, and I'm sorry that they happened, but that doesn't make it any easier for you all as pastors to use that as an excuse. It doesn't work for a lot of folks, and I can tell you that right now because I'm hearing that. A group of church members once worked on the incoming entrance of the church, planting flowers, discussing, and then when discussing this with the pastor on the following Sunday, the pastor said, "Yard work has never been very important interest of mine." It should be pointed out that for you all as pastors, and I'm just telling you this, I know you already know this, but even the slightest and smallest job needs to be acknowledged and appreciated. And a simple thank you really goes a long way. That's about all I have, Jane. It's about 11:45. Yeah, sure. And
I'd really like
Yeah.
to minister to the neighborhood and to the kids in the
Yeah.
neighborhood. I feel like that's the kind of testimony that as we try to share different stories,
Yeah.
for those of us who are gonna happily remain and move ahead united, I guess those are the kind of things that I'd like to be able to share, but I also just like to hear, some about that, because it sounds like it sort of happened a little bit by accident, and then,
It happened by accident.
and then on purpose.
Yeah.
And it just sort of caught
Yeah.
on.
Well, I'll tell you, at beginning, it was overwhelming, because some of these kids, even now, it took a while, and I don't mean this the way it's going to sound. We weren't trying to mold these kids into becoming respectful of our church or of our facilities, but they didn't even know when food was put out there, they didn't even know how to properly line up to get food. There was such food insecurity that it was overwhelming. It was overwhelming at first. And we ended up with some kids who really had to be put on probation for a while. That's the only way we could do it. We couldn't let them back in because their behavior was just so outrageous. But then by the same token, we saw so many wonderful things happen. And I was telling Jane, now we're seeing some of those same kids who came from these unbelievable backgrounds have gone on to college and have come back, and they are serving as lay persons leadership in our new generation of kids, because we've already graduated actually 2 groups now, and we've got another whole group of kids that are coming on, and they've come back and they're working with our youth now. We took 30 of them last week up to a camp up in Kentucky, and one of those leaders, a young girl who I wouldn't have given you a snowball's chance and you know where would have ever gone to college, is now graduating next year, and I honestly think she's going to go into ministry. She gave a testimony to our youth last week that literally knocked the socks off of those kids. How her life was headed in this direction, and because of what happened at this church, it changed her whole life, basically. And
The primary gathering is Sunday night, Wednesday night.
yeah, and we started out with, 3 vans, Jane? We just recently purchased another one, and we're going out into the toughest areas of Johnson City, east side of town, and the projects, basically. And we're just bringing them in. And I mean, I can't help but honestly tell you that food doesn't have something to do with it initially. It does. But then we take it from there. I mean, and personally, for me, it got me into something I never thought I would be doing. Jane actually got me into it, writing grants. I've written and received grants I'm up now to right at $400,000 over the last 10 years, 9 years. I just got 2 more this past 2 weeks ago. I learned a lot about writing a grant because financially it was difficult, even with our budget, to try and to do everything we were doing. We were basically doing something with these kids almost on a daily basis, and it costs money to do that. So.
A couple of things that you all just might be interested in. When we first started, and the kids it started with 4 kids, and they walked to church every Sunday morning. The youngest one was in the 5th grade, and that was Mikhail.
Mm-hmm.
And, why? And every single one of them said, "You love us. This church loves us." And at that time, what I was hearing was they thunder through the sanctuary and you can hear it all over the church.
Yeah.
And, you know, and I was so glad to hear that their perception was that the church loved them to be a part of it.
Mhm.
And they were the evangelists
Yeah.
who got
Yeah.
people to come. And so for Christmas, we had no way of getting in touch with these kids. Their parents were drug addicts. You know, one kid was homeless most of the time
Yeah.
and slept wherever he could find a place. And we didn't have phone numbers, and they didn't have one. And so somebody suggested that people donate their old cell phones, that then they could go to McDonald's and wouldn't have to have cell service, but could get on to the network and do messaging. And so Facebook Messenger became the way they contacted them.
Yeah.
Well, that's what they were.
Yeah.
Was before.
Yeah.
And people gave, that was one of the first things people started giving to, was, you know, because people replaced their cell phones. And I bet we got 30 or 40 cell phones and we gave them out to the
Yeah.
kids. And we took them to whatever, you know, some of them are connected to whatever service off the phone so they can use
Yeah.
What's a typical Sunday or Wednesday evening look like?
chaos.
Yeah.
But what sort of order are you striving for? So a meal and a kind of.
Yeah, the way it works is, the vans start out, around 4:45, 5 o'clock to pick up.
On both days?
Yeah, well, right now it's just on Wednesday, but on Sunday, no, not on Sunday. We don't run the vans. We run the vans now Sunday morning.
Sunday morning, okay.
Yeah,
So, but Wednesday,
Yeah.
you run the van.
yeah, and they start coming in around 5:15, and, we have, right now, I think 75, 80 kids on a Wednesday, sometimes even more than that, because we're pushing back up to 100 again. We've got around 50 or 60 senior highs. We've got about 20, 30 junior highs, and then our rest of the little ones. And we're bringing in a lot of younger families who like this ministry. You know, they really like this idea. So that's helping a lot. And they're white families, you know. But then we also have African-American families that are coming. Interestingly enough, they started coming with their kids, which is just, to me, is phenomenal that they're coming. That's a big deal. But I'll tell you one thing that happened that Jane, I know she'll remember this, but we had two boys. I think Jane called me and said these two boys were arrested last night. And you know, at the initial response to that was, okay, here we go again, you know. But that wasn't the case. They had ordered a pizza, and then when the guy brought the pizza, they grabbed the pizza and ran because they were hungry. They had nowhere to eat. So there's always these extenuating circumstances with every one of these kids. I was working with these kids in the summertime, a young girl, maybe 11, 12 years old, handing out, we were giving them popsicles. They were there for summer camp in the community. They were helping. We had the largest camp in the community at any other Methodist church in the whole conference at our church. And this girl came up and I gave her a popsicle. And she said, I don't want banana, I want grape. I said, okay. And I put my hand on her shoulder. I said, here, let me give you a grape. I put my hand on her shoulder. She responded like it was like a firecracker had gone off on her shoulder. It was so stupid for me to not realize. Apparently that girl had been abused, and having an older white guy reach and touch her was a real lesson for me. I learned pretty quickly that you better be careful about, even in love, reaching out to a kid that you never know what their background is. And that's the kind of thing that we dealt with and we're dealing with. Now, to take it after the meal, and the meal goes on, we have a birthday thing, and then we have each of those kids, every table gets to put a prayer request thing in the middle of the table. So you can write out, you wouldn't believe some of the prayer requests that we get. The pastor, no names, the pastor will read, praying for my father, he's in jail, praying for my so-and-so who's in rehab, praying this and this. And it's like every single week we've got that kind of thing going on. And these kids, you just never know what exactly is happening to them on a day-to-day basis and what they're living with. You know, it's just, but then we split up, all three groups go, and that's usually about 6:30, something like that. And then they're there till 7:30. And then a lot of times they stick around and play ball in the gym and that kind of thing. But we start the vans about 7:45 to start taking them back home again.
It's hard. It's really, really hard.
Yeah.
Could you say just a little bit more about the transition between the old church members and these kids who don't have table manners and don't,
Yeah.
because that had to be a little hard.
It was difficult. It was difficult for the older members of the church because I hate to characterize, but you got to understand, we were a downtown church with, you know, Paul went there. He knows what it was like. I mean, you had a lot of university people. You had a lot of faculty members. You had a lot of professional folks. And they were not used to the chaos that was occurring. But after,
I mean, when it first started, there were kids that would climb on the table. I mean,
Yeah.
it was chaos.
it was chaos. But after a while, it just suddenly, well, I'll tell you some of the things that happened. One of the older ladies of our church, who was distinguished as she could be, one of these kids came to her at the mall and said, "Aren't you a member of my church? I need a ride home." You know, as those kinds of things happened, that they finally, in my grant writing, I'll write, they became part of us and we became part of them. And that's exactly what happened. It's just, and it's, you know, it wasn't an easy, it was pretty phenomenal. Yeah.
And the youth, it was a youth mission trip, and these kids had never been anywhere.
Mhm.
And they went and they stopped at Subway to, I don't know. And the youth leader, who was the one who had invited before, whose husband is now about to graduate from seminary, I understand.
He did graduate.
Figured out he didn't know how to order food. And so she discreetly helped him and then realized, you know, that could help some of the
Mhm.
others. I mean, it's just stuff that we really take for granted,
Yeah.
that they've never been anywhere. They never went anywhere like Subway or anywhere else.
We also, in order to give them an opportunity, because these kids would never have the money or the opportunity to go shopping for their families for Christmas, we brought in all these gifts, and we wanted a gift that was significant, you know, not just a hand-me-down kind of thing. And then we wrapped the kids came together and we wrapped those gifts for those so they could take them to their families, that kind of thing. So it's the most insignificant thing for most people, came to us.
One of our people on Facebook Live says, ask Steve, how do you get past the elderly when the children are out? This is a situation where this pastor is in a situation similar, because
Yeah.
they've started a ministry, and the kids have started coming, and some of the people in the church are just bonkers.
It took a lot of counseling. I mean, it really did. I had to spend time pointing out to some individuals that, look, you don't understand where these kids are coming from, and you need to give this whole ministry a chance. And I mean, Jane, you were doing it on the regular basis as well, but we were lucky because I think God was working in our midst, and somehow it all came to pass. It all worked. I can't recall anybody actually leaving, except I told you about those two. But other than that, just this past week, I mean, I'm in a Sunday school class right now with older folks my age and older, and we've got about, about 40 folks coming every week. And so our senior high director came to me on Wednesday night, and he said, look, I'd like to take these kids up to Kentucky to this camp, and I don't want to take money from the budget. He said, could you all help us out? And I mean, just like that, we had $350 to give him to go ahead and take care of those kids that week. And that kind of thing is going on all the time. I think if they see the need, they step up. I mean, it's really been a blessing.
One of the other things is with a ministry like this, it became really important to learn the kids' names.
Yeah.
And a lot of their names were names that were not usual names, and we wouldn't know how to spell them. But the church started learning to identify some of them, and they would come. There were some kids on a football team at Science Hill, and they would see it in the paper and come and say, this is one of our kids.
Mm-hmm.
And that was when I knew that it really was, they became ours and we became theirs.
Yeah. We currently have 5 varsity football players in our youth group. And interestingly enough, we have to send a special van to pick them up on Wednesday night because their practices are running longer than our van routes. So we go and we call them the football boys. They come in about 20 or 30 minutes later than everybody else. So, but anyway, thank you all for having me.
I think for those of you all who are interested, Steve and some folks from First Church would probably love to do like some interaction of helping churches that might be able to do and some sort of inner city ministry. And really, honestly, I think Steve's right. 10, 11 years ago, nobody would have predicted that was what would have happened at First United Methodist Church in Johnson City. And for years, you know, we've been being told as pastors, you've got to connect with the community outside your church. You need to look like the neighborhood around you. And for churches like First, that was a real challenge. But this is what happened, and it really has become more of a neighborhood church, and folks who do look like the neighborhood come. But it's not easy. It takes, I mean, just doing vans it feels like you've worked about 12 hours when you ride on one of those vans for 15 minutes. So y'all feel free to ask him questions. because he and his wife and your Sunday school class have been critical in the life of, and it's a great example of how it takes the laity to be the church. That it can't be the pastor saying, now you all, we're going to do this, because it's not physically possible for the pastor to do it. And we don't all have the same gifts in being able to do it. So, you know, you recently hired an African-American youth leader, which is fantastic. You know, because it's just wonderful.
It really helps with the young African-American guys. Have this guy. He's really, really awesome. And it makes a big difference in their lives sometimes.
Some of the kids who were in the first round of kids, they have graduated. Some have gone to college. Some have not gone to college. But I think they're still at the church.
We have I didn't mention that, I should have.
Get back up
there. A young adult group that, they come on Thursday nights, and, there's about 20 of them that are coming. They play basketball, they, go out to eat together. The young man that she mentioned that's just finished, going into ministry, and he's just graduated this year, he's helping them with job, finding work and that kind of thing. So it's a very eclectic kind of group. They do their own thing, but I don't know. They really are part of us still, which is interesting. So.
One other thing that I'll tell you is there was a retired pastor in the congregation, and he had been a district superintendent. He had been the director of the conference office across the street from the church, and he was really active in the church, and he started declining, and they took the youth to go see him at his house, and that was the highlight of his life for about a month, because he just was so thrilled that the youth came to visit him. And there's pictures of that.
He probably was hugely supportive too when you started it.
Oh, yeah, yeah. So let's have a prayer, and then we'll have this wonderful lunch. Gracious God, we just thank you for this day. We thank you, God, for the call that you have on our lives, both as laity and as clergy. And help us to see what you want us to do, what your vision for us is as we continue to serve you faithfully. Thank you for this food, and thank you for Theresa and for Diane, who helped so much with this.